Today, I'm going to be talking about an approach I've taken to my own freelance development studio that I'm calling Incremental Content Management. And the project I'm going to be talking about today is combining Laravel and Eleventy to deliver on this concept. But I've actually used this approach with basically all of my clients over the past couple of years, and it's working really well for a lot of different use cases. So we'll kind of get into that towards the end. But just real quick, here's what we're gonna do today. I'm gonna give you a quick rundown of just who I am, my background, where my experience is coming from. I'm gonna tell you about the project, which is called Flat Fee Advisors. And while this is about that project, this is actually my first project as a freelancer. I'm still taking care of this today. And so in a way, this is also a little bit of the story of how my freelance agency came to be. In particular, I'm going to be talking about using Eleventy to add a blog to the existing Laravel application. And I achieved this in under 30 minutes. I think it will take me as long, if not longer, to explain the process than it took me in real time to figure out how to get this working. If it looks complicated as I'm explaining it, just keep in mind that in real time, I accomplished this in about as long as it's going to take me to walk you through it today. I'm going to reflect a little bit on how it's going today. We're still using the setup that I described here, some of the options that we're looking at in the future, and then kind of more generally, how I apply this concept across my clients. So who am I? My name is Josh. I originally grew up in Maine. I lived in the state of New York for about 10 years, 5 years in Rochester, and then 5 in New York City. I am now headquartered in Texas, but spend most of my time beachside in El Salvador, really enjoying that freelancer life to travel. Quick work history. I did a couple of internships in college at an agency in Rochester called Brand Networks, which is now owned by Agio. My first post-graduation job, I worked on a lead generation company that did telemarketing. I worked on their automated dialing software, writing Perl scripts to handle calls and all sorts of other quirky things. I left ClickSpark to be employee number 1 at a startup in New York City called ThankView, where they make software for sending personalized video. And at the end of 2021, ThankView was acquired by a private equity firm and merged with another company called Evertrue. And at the start of 2022, I left to take a sabbatical and later started my now agency, SoftClay Software. So who is... Let's meet Josiah. He is the founder of Flat Fee Advisors, the project that launched my agency. And he and I actually met in college. We formerly worked together at another company he was working on called MySpiderWeb, which was a piece of software that was very similar to Buffer, just for a more niche audience, that Josiah was building as part of his human-computer interaction master's capstone at the time. He approached me in 2022 telling me about his story finding a financial advisor and how he wanted to build a service to help other people find a flat fee financial advisor that worked for them. So he devised a whole survey and matching algorithm and scoring algorithm for doing this. And he wanted to turn it into a web app. So he approached me and we ran through a lot of the requirements. Now, at this point, Josiah had actually attempted to contact essentially every financial advisor in the United States. And if you've never worked with a financial advisor, they all have to be registered with the SEC. So there is a giant database that Josiah can go through and list and get information for thousands of financial advisors. And he actually did this and talked to, I think, at least a few hundred, if not a few thousand, as he was developing this. And he got a handful of advisors who were interested in being part of this platform. And he built out a database in a spreadsheet, as many small businesses do. And so he wanted to use this spreadsheet that he built to maintain the application. He needed the ability to import it into the database for updates. We are working with a survey, so we need to process form submissions. He wanted to be able to send the results of that submission by email. So we have some transactional email involved. He wanted to be able to run some custom reports against that database. He had already worked with a designer to kind of mock up what he wanted the survey experience to be. It was a very interactive slide-based form UX. And he wasn't really sure where this would go afterwards, if it would be a self-service platform that advisors could sign up for, that users could sign up for and get more information. There was a lot of like, let's see where this goes. And so with all of those requirements in mind, I landed on Laravel for a couple of reasons. One, I had recently used it at ThankView, so I was very familiar with it, already had like workflows ready to go just from my recent experience. I really like Artisan. It's a library, I guess you could say, or a class within Laravel for assisting you in writing terminal commands. So it makes it very easy for you to write command line interface programs. Josiah, having a master's in human computer action, he's a pretty technical guy. He's comfortable with a command line interface and SSHing into a server to run some things. So Laravel made it easy to fulfill all of these requirements for him without also having to build a full user interface to facilitate them. And so from a prototyping perspective, this made it really great. We could, build all of these requirements without worrying too much about user-facing stuff, while also laying a foundation to add those things later if we need. And that's going to be a little bit of a recurring theme as we go through this here. Laravel has a very robust ecosystem full of resources and services and libraries and frameworks all wrapped up within it. So there's a lot of flexibility here to support however he chooses to grow this service. And so in 2022, we said, okay, we'll spin up Laravel, we'll get it working. And here's how it looks today. And this is more or less how it looked when it launched. We haven't edited the site too extensively. We've made a few changes to the form questions and the UX a little bit. We've made some small copy edits. And of course, we've added the blog. But by and large, the website has been the same since we launched it about 3.5 years ago. And then I want to say 9 months or so after we launched the site, Josiah started working with a marketing agency in Rochester called Linden Digital Marketing. And he wanted to enlist their help in driving more traffic to the site with a bunch of search engine optimization. So they helped Josiah devise a content marketing strategy and did some keyword research to help him find people who are looking for a financial advisor. And so now the question became, how do we add a blog to our existing app without like having to start over or trying to figure out how do I get a CMS to talk to the Laravel application? Like, how do I combine these things? So I looked into some CMSs that work with Laravel, and some pretty actually fantastic options came out. Strappy looks really interesting. Statamic also. And there's some others, Winter, October. I don't know a whole lot about them, but they came up and have some Laravel integrations. And then I also stumbled upon this library, I guess, called Backpack, which is for building custom Laravel admin interfaces. And so I briefly considered, like, what if I just built like a simple portal where all you could do was publish a blog post? Maybe that would be enough. Because at this point in the process, Josiah was talking about experimenting with content marketing. This was not some, they had a little bit of a plan, but it was one blog post a month for a while. There's not a whole lot of frequent editing happening here. And so as I was looking at these options and figuring out how to get a blog here, it seemed like a whole lot of work for something that he wasn't totally sure he would even stick with. And all of these involved installing things into the application, making configuration changes, and it just felt like a whole lot of complexity for something that, again, we weren't sure if he was even going to stick with. And then I thought, well, I have a blog. And the Laravel application has a public folder served by a web server. And my blog is just a whole bunch of static HTML. So why shouldn't I just copy it? What happens if I strip down that template to just the bare minimum, just give me like a single index feed page and a post view with no styles and build it. So I did exactly that. I took my existing personal blog, which is built in 11D. I stripped everything out except the absolute bare essentials, like 6 lines of HTML in a template kind of thing. Ran the build, copied it to the public folder, and turns out web servers are web servers. Who would have thought? If you point a website at a route not handled by Laravel, it'll just do web server things like serve static HTML. And so I accomplished this in a few minutes and like within a couple of minutes. And so then I thought, okay, in theory, this works. I can put static HTML in this directory and it'll work. So that leaves just a few open questions like, how will Josiah publish new posts? And since this was still experimental, it was 1 post a month. I thought, okay, for now, I'll do it. No matter how complicated this gets, he's still figuring out if this is going to be a long-term thing. I'll take care of it for him. And the bigger issue, of course, is this is not what we want it to look like. It doesn't match the theme of the website. It doesn't have our navigation, our standard footer. We want to share styles and navigation and our third-party scripts and everything across these two things. So that needed to be solved. And then I also wondered, okay, how do I want to deploy this? Because, again, initially, if I'm doing it, I build it locally and I manually copy the entire blog folder onto the web server. That's fine. It's once a month. It takes a few minutes. But if this becomes a regular thing, that's a little bit of an annoying process to have to do all the time. So that needed some figuring out. So first things first, I thought, okay, how am I going to share things across here? And I briefly started going down the path of having Laravel actually handle the blog routes on the server and just like somehow load the static HTML into a Laravel template. And that might be possible, but with a few minutes of tinkering, I really couldn't get it to work. And in that time, I actually discovered you can compile Blade templates basically on demand just by wrapping them in Laravel's view method and calling the render function. And this will return the static HTML with all of the PHP in your Blade template processed. So this is really important because I have a production environment, I have my local development environment, and some of the pathing for my includes and just what gets included on a page is environment specific. So I couldn't just copy the Blade templates as is. And I also didn't think I could get 11D to process Blade as a syntax. I vaguely recall that being a thing that exists now. I think somebody's done this, but as we'll get to in a second about deployment, that also I don't think would work for my use case here. And so I realized if we can compile that HTML and just copy it into 11D's source directory, then in 11D land, it's just another include and our templates can consume them. And we can make copying these easy with our friend Artisan. We can set up another command to just copy these over. And so that left me with one remaining question, which is, how do I deploy this? Like, what does the infrastructure for this sort of setup look like, and how can we make this convenient? So I decided to keep the blog as a separate repo because I already have a blog website repo in 11D set up that I start from all the time. It's already configured the way I like to work with a blog. And so I decided to not introduce it to the application repository directly. I thought keeping them separate would simplify rolling back if Josiah decided like he didn't want to do content marketing or whatever. And as I was doing it, it did occur to me like, is this a good idea? Like, should I be cloning a repo into a repo? I don't know. What I can tell you is it is really convenient, and it has made for a pretty useful process. Putting the blog source in scope of the Laravel application allows us to readily interact with it just using relative pathing. If we know where our source blog directory is, if we know the structure of it, then the Laravel application can do anything it wants with it. That also means that we can very easily write an artisan command to do the entire build process, not just copying over the Blade templates, but actually pulling in updates from the repo, running a Levendy's build process, etc. I don't know how readable this is in this screenshot on your screens. We can open up the code if anybody's curious about this later. But essentially, in the artisan command, you are also able to run other like command line scripts via function call. And so all I'm doing here is artisan will navigate into the blog directory, run a git pull. It'll compile the Blade templates from itself, copy them into that 11D source directory, and then go back into the 11D blog directory and run my 11D build command, which I have set up as an npm script. So it just runs npm run production, and the 11D build kicks off. Now within there, I also have some configuration variables for the application because we're using relative pathing. There is a little bit of quirkiness per environment. So I had to make these things configurable via environment variables. So the blog source and its final output directory are configurable per environment. So I can run this in production and I can run this locally. Okay. And so now I know what you're thinking, probably, or possibly you're thinking like, isn't this a little bit manual or isn't this kind of a lot just to avoid setting up a CMS? But, we're still doing this process a year and a half later. I'm actually publishing the next blog post tomorrow morning, and it will be exactly like this. I'm sent the post in Google Docs. I download it as Markdown, do a little bit of cleanup because Google Docs Markdown is not great. I drop it into 11D, I commit to the Git repo, and then I run my build command. And the entire process, start to finish, takes 15 or 20 minutes. And at this point, we're now publishing 3 to 4 posts a month. And so it is time to kind of start thinking a little bit bigger. How do we make this more efficient? Because once a week is at the point where it's like, okay, you're doing enough updates now that maybe a manual process like this is not so desirable. And it occurred to me as I was doing this that we're essentially using Laravel plus Artisan as a build server. Since this is the experience that you get when you run the build in this way. I'm simply logging out the progress here. Artisan is able to detect if these other command line processes complete successfully or not. So I have error handling in there to report when a build fails. So I can do all the debugging and things that I need. And so with this in place, starting to think about like, all right, what do we do next? And the most obvious one is anytime that we push to the blog repo, we could fire off a webhook and trigger this build process. So that's actually what I'm in the middle of setting up at the moment. I have the webhook live at the moment. It just sends me an email, but this is the first step towards automating that publishing so that it's kind of transparent to the end user. And like I said, Josiah is a pretty technical guy, so he might be comfortable using GitHub as a basic text editor. Like once he's done all of his regular publishing, I could show him, hey, here's how you download in Markdown. Here's how you can add it to GitHub, make a couple of cleanups and commit, done, it's published. But because the blog repo is separate, that also means we are free to connect anything we want to it without impacting the Laravel application. The only thing that the Laravel application needs to be concerned about is when it needs to run the build command. Everything else is fully self-contained, which also makes the blog portable to some other platform. And I think that's another huge perk. And Pages CMS is going to get its second shout out of the day. I'm also considering simply connecting Pages CMS to it, and then again connecting that automation. This would give Josiah or anyone else that he decides to bring onto the team who might write for the blog, a more convenient UI, and everything is what am I trying to say? It gets you closer to that like traditional CMS experience without the like overhead or potential platform lock-in that tends to come with the complexity of an all-in-one system. And I think that flexibility is really essential because particularly for small businesses or solopreneurs who are starting out, open to what they're building, going in a lot of different directions, and not prescribing too many tools. And so as I've played around with this, I feel like I'm just kind of scratching the surface here with what you can do if you combine the power of a full application framework like Laravel with the simplicity of a static site generator in some kind of unconventional ways. We could add user authentication here and build a custom comment system or a custom paywall subscription system if we need that, or if the idea of using a platform from some third party has privacy or security concerns, or whatever else you might be concerned about. I'm also considering possibly kind of flipping the script here a little bit and having 11D handle all public-facing content pages and strictly using Laravel for those more application parts. Because then, it's not just the blog that's editable, it's potentially every public page. And while we haven't really changed those much over the years, that could become a new requirement. And so again, I can potentially connect all of the content-heavy pages to something like Pages CMS, or if they need something bigger, Cloud Cannon, or some other major static site CMS, again, without affecting the Laravel application, the part that is actually much more custom. And then I think even bigger about maybe we could build a new CMS type experience explicitly made for 11D that doesn't really deal much in a database, but actually just provides a UI for facilitating these types of file-based or Git-based actions on an 11D code base. And then it also handles building and hosting the site. And then also internally, I'm hosting most of my client websites on Netlify, but this process has showed me actually a DIY Netlify is maybe within reach a bit more easily than I expected. And that opens up some really interesting possibilities for things that I can do for my clients, either for lower cost or more easily than I might be able to in an environment like Netlify. In other words, that flexibility really showing up. And so, all of this is great, but what did I learn? And it's that 11D's simplicity provides really incredible flexibility. You can kind of just throw it at anything and come up with something that works. And I've learned that the scale at which you need a CMS, I think, is far bigger than conventional wisdom would dictate. I think in industry, we often tell people that the minute they want to edit their website somewhat regularly, they should reach for a power tool like WordPress or Webflow, or use a builder like Squarespace. But I think, especially if you're also a freelancer or have ever done agency work, we've all encountered a website like that has had that just throw a power tool with a plugin at it mentality. And you end up with a very complicated beast that a lot of people don't actually want to use. And so we've spawned a whole industry of people who know how to use the power tools on behalf of the people who are supposed to be able to use the tools themselves. And so I think also as a freelancer trying to deliver high value features quickly, I think mixing and matching tools that someone actually uses will beat an all-in-one CMS most of the time. And I'm calling this approach incremental content management, just sort of myself. And what I mean by that is you expose editing capabilities in a very targeted manner. You hone in on what content somebody actually wants to edit and find a tool that will let them edit that type of content in a way that they will actually want to use it, and then create custom integrations and simple automations that tie it all together to provide that seamless experience. Because what I'm finding working with a lot of clients, I have just a few of my examples here. All of these websites are built with 11D and leverage this concept in one way or another, whether it's a blog, a full-on e-commerce shop, a online course, a newsletter, like, all of these are built with 11D and have some degree of editing available to clients in a format that works for them. And so I think what I'm trying to say is, instead of just assuming that every website should be built with an all-in-one CMS, that with a simple tool like 11D paired with something powerful like Laravel or some other tool to manage what you're interested in, you can do a lot very, very easily. And so really what I'm trying to say is just use the right tool for the job to manage the content at hand, versus an all-in-one CMS, which tries to manage all of your content. And in one way or another, that kind of system is going to fall short for somebody, and it's going to make them not want to use it. And what I've really learned, migrating people away from these self-serving tools, is that nobody really wants to edit their website. They just want the information on their website to be up to date and correct. And so if you hand somebody a tool to, say, just publish a blog that doesn't require them to go into the overwhelming admin panel of WordPress, that might work better for them. One of my other clients, they do a lot of in-person events, and they want those events to appear on the website. They also want to collect RSVPs and all sorts of things. Rather than try to build that into the CMS just to display it on the website, I instead connected them with a tool for managing events. And with 11D, I simply pull that in. And so I say, instead of building your website in an all-in-one CMS, just use whatever disparate tools you actually like and build your website in a way that it does the hard work of pulling all of that data together for you. And I think in a market where platforms are competing for market share and lock-in, this approach helps promote interoperability over lock-in. And I think there's a whole lot of opportunity to build some really interesting things here if we kind of take this concept a little bit further, with sort of these more mix and match pieces rather than trying to come up with a whole system to manage everything. So that is incremental content management. Today I was talking about it with Laravel, but like I said, I'm using it to some extent with all of my clients. And I'm finding really good results with it. My clients are happy, and I don't know. I think there's a lot of unexplored territory here that people could really dive into. So at this point, I've been talking a little too much, so I'm going to turn it over to everybody else and see what you all think. Is this a bad idea? Is this a great idea? Is there a foot gun that I am not seeing? What do we think?